Welcome to In the Ven Zone with Christine McKay, where we get candid about what it takes to negotiate effectively. You'll learn from the challenges and successes of entrepreneurs, executives, and experts. We help you change the nature of your negotiations and get more from every deal you do.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another amazing episode of In the Ven Zone, where we help you, the small and mid-sized business, elevate your negotiation skills. And we do that by bringing you really wonderful guests who have really rich experience and stories and share awesome ideas, things that have worked for them in the past as they go through negotiation. And today is no exception to that rule. So today we have with us Samantha Hartley. Now, Samantha came to me from a good friend named Patty Lawrence, who has introduced me to these really remarkable people. And Samantha works with Patty as one of her clients. And I have watched Patty's business in the last 12 months go from, 0 to 60 like crazy. She has just grown really fast. Patty just signed one of her largest clients ever in history. And so, and Samantha has been instrumental in helping her do that. And so I'm really excited to have Samantha on the show to share with us some of the things that she has learned along her route. She works with consultants who are stuck trying to grow or they're trying to transition. And she helps them multiply their revenues without exhaustion by working with perfect clients on transformational engagements so they can have profitable, joyful consultancies. And in fact, she hosts a podcast, the Profitable, Joyful Consulting Podcast, which I was just on, and I'm super excited about that. So Samantha lives in Martha's Vineyard, and which is gorgeous if you've never been. I love that she gets to live there all the time. That's amazing. She lives there with her husband and their furry kids. And so how many furry kids do you have? And welcome.
Thank you so much. I have a big dog, a medium dog, and a cat.
Very cool. Awesome. I have my dog. My little dog is right by my feet and periodically jumps into my lap. So if you're watching on YouTube, you actually might see Wallace join us. So, so Samantha, it's great to have you. I'm so excited to have you on the show. I've loved every conversation you and I have had.
Me too. Thank you. And I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. So tell us about your journey. How did you get to this point?
I come from a theater and liberal arts background, Russian language, so completely did not expect to end up in this place. We'll have kind of an unexpected beginning with leaving college, doing liberal arts and Russian language. And I went overseas to Russia. And while I was there, I ended up eventually getting hired by the Coca-Cola company. And that kind of launched my international marketing career. So that was many moons ago. I was there at their corporate offices, and I just really didn't have a good time at corporate because it's all about the politics and not about the work. So I left and went on my own. I'd been an internal consultant for that company. And a lot of my first clients were my colleagues from there who had worked there too, which is why I always say, no matter what kind of a time you had at your job, never burn your bridges, because a lot of times that place that you just left, you will end up being your first client, and all of those colleagues that you maybe had fraught relationships with at the time, they can turn into your clients. So that launched my consulting business. And over the years, I've worked with so many different kinds of businesses, brick and mortar, manufacturing, because I came out of manufacturing. I was with the bottling company with Coke for a while. All kinds of service businesses, mom and pop, startups. And because I've seen the inside of so many businesses over 20 years, when people tell me their story, it's I understand the uniqueness of you as a beautiful snowflake. And I also see the connections to many other businesses. So I'm able to make observations that are, for some people, freakishly accurate. And I'm yes, but the fact is I've just been in the middle of on the inside of so many businesses. And so it's familiar, what you're experiencing. I've seen it before.
I love that, because a lot of times, and I love that, people are snowflakes, and so unique, but companies and the issues that they face, and people ask me this all the time as a negotiator, they're well, what do you focus on? Do you do just real estate? Do you do just tech? And I'm No, because the process is the same in negotiation. I don't really care what the industry is. And if I don't have the knowledge, then I find the resources to gain the knowledge about the industry and get specific about that. But it's the process. And so when you're in a lot of businesses, you see the overlap, and it's astonishing, the overlap. But it is also astonishing that people say to me, well, you don't understand my industry because it's so different. And I'm like,
yeah.
No.
Well, it's funny because a lot of consultants, so I work almost exclusively now with consultants who are either working, whether working B2B, whether with small businesses or multi-billion-dollar corporations. But the funny thing is that a lot of consultants fear being asked, well, have you ever worked with my kind of business before? And then they're like, what if I haven't? So I've only had one business in 20 years say, have you ever worked with someone like us before? Like whatever. And it was a community bank. And I said, well, if you want to be the best bank you can be, I'm sure you can bring in some sort of banking consultant, but if you want to be the best business you can be, well, then that's what I'm going to help you to do. And they were like, sold. So, it's, it just depends on what their goals are.
Right. Exactly. So tell us a little bit about kind of how you work with your clients, because like I said, I've watched Patty's transformation in her business in the last 12 months, and it is just really impressive. And so I'm really curious, because the negotiation, like there's so many negotiation points along that journey, and a journey that has that kind of exponential growth and so quickly. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I've been working with Patty for a long time. And when she first came to me, she did one of those little home study courses that I offered. And what was really interesting about her, and you'll know this in your perfect clients, is that they'll implement like crazy. She was just taking, it was like a home study course, but there were Q&A calls. She got on every single call, and then she would implement. There were many other people with smaller businesses than Patty's who couldn't be bothered to get on the calls and to take advantage of those benefits. So I really knew early on that she was going to be, somebody who was going to be successful. So when Patty, a little while after that, she came to me and we started to work one-on-one together. And one of the things that she was doing in her business was working by the hour, she's a virtual CFO, and she was doing virtual CFO services for her clients and charging by the hour. And the average client size was about $3,000. And so I helped her transition away from hourly, because when you're charged by the hour, you're actually penalized for efficiency. Your clients are hesitant to call you because they don't want the meter running. Every time they call you, it costs them more money. So it really discourages them from kind of taking advantage of your genius. And then I don't understand how you bill for time when you got the great idea in the shower or while you're out on a hike. Do you charge them for that? It's just confusing to me. So I think hourly billing is completely inappropriate for consultants and consultancies. So we began to transition. And what she did was she charged for outcomes. She was like, here's what your business is going to be like when we're done over the course of working with us. This is what we're going to get you to. And that's what she sold. So that's an outcome. So I worked with her to develop what those outcomes were with her clients, how to communicate them. And now she's charging more like $10,000 or $11,000 a month to these clients who are working with her. So it's time-based. It may sound time-based by charging them by the month, but it's actually charging them for the outcomes that she's getting them. So that kind of exemplifies the work I do with consultants, because when they come to me, usually this is a kind of a funny thing, is that they are so busy with client work that they're maxed out. And so it seems like they're really successful, but they're actually stuck because they can't grow anymore. So I've had several clients come to me and say, we're exhausted. We don't have any place for more clients to go. And we're like that, which is why I promise that they can grow without exhaustion, because they're like, I know we could work harder. We could work even more nights and weekends, but that's not going to make them happy. So we transition the way they work usually from, and it's not always hourly, but it's very often, it's a lot of trading time for money. And they're very often not charging, it's not just not what they're worth, but they're not charging for the outcomes that they can achieve for the client. So they're really undercharging relative to what they can get. So I had a client who came to me, Carrie, she is an IT consultant, and she has a small firm, a partner, and 5 or 6 employees. And they were doing about $750,000 when they came to me, but same thing, charging by the hour. And the problem, especially for when you have a team of people, is they're logging those hours and showing them to the client. And I was like, did the client ask you to show them to them? And they were like, well, that's kind of how it's done in our industry. I was like, well, here's a new phrase for you. And we just like literally said this back to each other in our work. We don't work that way. That's not how we work. So we transitioned away from that. They started working for outcomes and said, here's the outcome we're going to get for you. Here's the timeline for getting that outcome. And here's what we're going to charge you. And the client was like, okay. They've even had some clients say to them, wow, I wish everybody worked that way. So instead of this like tracking hours and just being inside the work, they get to say, how do we get that outcome? How can we achieve that more efficiently? And speaking of a negotiation, obviously selling that into the client, it can be, that's a new thing and it takes a lot of courage to completely try a new thing, but this is a courageous client and they did it. So they've really doubled their business over the last year working with me.
I love that. I love that on a lot of levels. So one of the things that people do in negotiation all the time, right, is, and especially if they're working with a bigger company, it's like, well, this is just how we do it, right? There's no logic behind it. I learned years and years and years ago not to ask the question why ever in any situation. It's a horrible question.
Yeah.
And I make no apologies to you, Simon Sinek, when you are listening to the show. Don't give a damn about your why. I care about your what's and your how's a lot more than your why. But the thing is that, when in a negotiation, when you say, ask somebody why, you're often the response back is because. And you can't do anything with because. There's no action that can take place on a because. And then you get into what I call faith-based versus fact-based negotiation, because because it's a faith-based thing, right? You just literally can't do anything with it. But what I love what you also did, so you kind of take that part of it out of it and you give people permission to be curious and explore other possibilities and other ways of doing business, which is an awesome thing. How do we make this relationship better? Which is really what negotiation is all about, is how do we make it better? But the other thing you do is you redefine what value is, and you've made value tangible to your clients. How do we essentially productize which probably isn't even a word, but how do we turn time into a product? And I know I do that for our Venn Negotiation Pro services. We actually try to do as much of our work as we can based on the successful outcome of a negotiation, and we charge based on that outcome, which is a very different model than what an attorney does, who's not, they're charging by the minute, right? So what kind of things have you encountered with your clients as you've had to get them to negotiate with themselves to get over that hurdle? To your last example, saying, well, that's just not how it's done in our industry. And this is a point, a lot of consultants say to me, well, I don't really negotiate, but this is an example right here, everybody. What Samantha is talking about, she's had to negotiate with her clients to get them over this hurdle to think about how to do something in a different way.
Every day. I mean, every day there's something that we negotiate. It's like, well, can I get myself to do this difficult thing that I have to do? So it's a great point that the first people I have to convince that this is a possibility are my clients. Before that, like, they have to be really sold on this before they can go and attempt it. And in Carrie's case, she and her partner, we sat and we did this over in a VIP day in a little conference room in New Orleans last year, right before the pandemic hit. And we basically talked the whole thing through. And I was like, the way that you're working is penalizing you. Also, they had this, from the client's point of view, they had this like up, down expenses, because sometimes there would be a month that would be a $10,000 month, and then a $50,000 month, and then 25. And it was, so that's difficult for the client. And I had a finance guy say to me one time that even big companies hate lumpy expenses. I thought that was really helpful, because you feel like, they're big, they don't care. No, they don't want to have this kind of an expenditure. And my clients, for them, they couldn't schedule anybody's work. Because like somebody, that meant like people were there the whole entire month and they couldn't be on something else. And so it was chaotic for both sides. So you can hear, this is what I do is I interview out of them what's not working about it. And then when they're like, but we can't really do that, I'm like, here's what you just taught me. And then I tell it back to them and they're like, that's really convincing. I'm like, I know, because it was what you just said. So we work through the reasons that what we're doing right now isn't working. It's not working for us. It's not working for the client. And I'm sure there are other constituents, like the people on the teams, other people who it's not working for. And then we get to look at, why is doing it a different way in everyone's best interest? Well, people do want to have a shared outcome, and they do want to be able to kind of plan their time. So restructuring the work was actually good for everybody. And, again, this client she's competitive. She's excited. She was excited about sales. So she's a good example of somebody who was like, when she heard it, she was like, I want to make that work. And so she did do it. But, I have other clients who were more reticent, let's just say. So my client, Cheryl, came out of mid-sized manufacturing in Chicago. In her first year, she'd done about $150,000 in consulting with 3 clients. And she said, I feel like my business I feel like it's a $2 million a year business. And I said, I think so. So let's build that. So the first year, what I wanted her to do was restructure who she worked with. Her clients were too small, who she worked with and how she worked with them. Well, if you don't want to talk about a negotiation, this is somebody who's like, but here's what I was doing. And I know that wasn't working, but what you're saying is really big and scary. And what she told to me later. So we spent 5 months of the year, the first year we worked together, 5 months of that. I was like, okay. And so now we're going to do this. And she'd be like, and I'd meet with her next week, and it hadn't been done. So every single week I was like, how come this isn't happening? And we got 5 months in, and I said to her, okay, so I'm not going to do any more. We were doing some of the done for you marketing for you. I'm not going to do any marketing. We're not going to do anything. Everything is stopping until you go and sell a client. And I've heard her say that what was preventing her was she was like, but I don't really know how to sell a client. And I was like, but you do. And within a month, she had sold like 200,000, and in the next few months, she sold like it was 600,000 in new business. So as you're saying, like the negotiation was that she was like, but I don't know how to do it, but I can't do it. But I'm convinced this is the right way. Like she had everything she needed. And it was just this like mindset hurdle of, can I do this? She went to a conference. For those who are like, how did she do it though? She went to a conference where she is a kind of a rock star in her industry. And everybody was like, what are you doing? What are you working on? You have a glow about you. And she was like, well, here's what I have going on and this and that. And boom, 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 boom. She got a bunch of clients from that. So I think the key here in the negotiation is really knowing when the person, getting the individual, the you in this case, getting us to the point where we can say, I believe in this enough that I can go and take a different kind of action than I've ever taken before.
I love that. And that's one of the things that I talk about when in negotiation is getting clear on what it is you want. And once you have that clarity, it makes it so much easier to say yes or to say no if it's not the right fit in terms of the types of clients that you want to work with, in terms of what their problems look like, and what issues, and what you can actually, do you enjoy this work? Is it fun? And that it gives you so much power to have that. And I love that you helped her think that through and kind of get over that hurdle, because it's hard to sell things when you don't believe in them. And for some people can sell anything to anybody. Right. But for most of us, we need to believe in what it is that we're selling. And even though we believe in ourselves, we may be trying to sell in a traditional way, and that part doesn't feel right to us. So how do we modify it and adjust it in a way that works for us, that actually gives us more power at the negotiation table, because it gives us that power to walk away if it's not the right fit.
Yeah. I'm queen of like, clients have to be perfect fit for you. And in Cheryl's case, this one I've just been telling you about, the people she'd been working with, the clients she'd been working with were too small for her. And she had like really big ideas. And so I think a really important thing to pay attention to is if you feel like, I'm never able to get my car out of second gear. Like I want to feel like what fifth gear feels like. Well, that feels like being able to do the whole model of what you do, bring down all of your intellectual property and implement it with your clients. Like you should feel like I'm doing all of my work and all my best work with this client. And if you're feeling like, they just needed a little tiny bit of what I do, that's not as fulfilling. So it isn't that that's a bad client. It's just like they don't fit as well as these ones that allow you to do so much more. And that's what we were really looking for Cheryl, was she had big ideas. She had just begun to bring these ideas into existence. She was still kind of, getting these divine downloads about what she wanted to do. And this is in the area of human resources. So she's like, how do I develop people? What's my model, my system for these things? And it required clients who had the capacity to actually use these services and not be too small.
That's a really good point. I know I'm going through that myself in terms of, I love working with small and mid-sized businesses, but as part of why I've launched my Venn Masters program to serve smaller businesses, because for them to hire me as a negotiator, it's not, one, I'm probably more expensive than they can afford, but two, it's not as enjoyable for me because I enjoy negotiating complex transactions. So I am partnering with a hedge fund to help them negotiate the deals that they're investing in. And
awesome.
I'm loving it. It's just like such cool work. And so I think, that goes to that clarity, right? Mm-hmm. What do you want? What type of clients do you want? What do you want them to be doing? What do you want your work to be doing? Because I keep saying it over and over. That's where you gain power. Because power and leverage is a conversation that comes up in negotiation all the time. And people often have said to me, well, I just don't have any. And I'm like, well, that's because you voluntarily chose to acquiesce it. You gave that up willingly,
give it up,
right? You have the ultimate power in any negotiation is, my second favorite word, which is no. And no, except in sex, no means no that in that situation. But in the rest of the time, no is an invitation to ask a different question, right? And so, having that clarity and understanding what that is that you want to be doing gives you that leverage, gives you that power that you have that you need to create the business that you really want to create.
Yes. And isn't that what it's all about?
Exactly. I mean, we don't have to serve everybody. So tell me, these are like amazing stories and I love them. Tell me about some times when the negotiation hasn't been so successful, when you haven't been able to get either yourself over one of those hurdles or your client over a hurdle like that.
My latest podcast episode is about how to fire a client. And I was just writing about this today. When you're in situations where, you're working with someone and it just can't go on. And, I was just saying that I advocate for my clients to work exclusively with perfect clients. And so if you end up firing someone, it means that at one point they seemed really perfect or as close to perfect as possible. What I will always tell my clients is, the book Blink by Malcolm Gladwell.
Oh my God, one of my favorite books.
Right?
He's one of my favorite authors of all time.
Me too. So, yeah. And what I really love about that book is you can tell in a second and a half of footage whether the doctor's going to get accused of malpractice. You can tell if this marriage is going to last. And I will always say, you can tell in that first meeting with a client whether they're going to be perfect or not. And we step over all of those things, all of those signals that we had that they're not going to be perfect, and to work with them anyway. So we just brush those things off. And I always say that there's red flags and then there's yellow flags. So probably they didn't show any red flags. They showed yellow flags, and yellow flags means that we have to use discernment and say, well, I think it's, I'm going to stand back and I'm going to hesitate, but I'm just going to think about it. And in my case, I chose to work with a client who I'd heard some well, here's some caution things. And I thought, okay, well, I'll keep that in mind. And then there were some, the project itself, I don't normally do short-term projects, but I thought it's kind of fun. It's kind of interesting. And I think this short-term thing could turn into a long-term thing. So those are all the things that I told myself about this situation. And then we get into it and it just, it's just a thing that gets out of hand. So I wrote today about examples where your contact at the client leaves and now you're dealing with a replacement and it's not a priority for the replacement. And then you're like, okay, now what do I do? Or the client just starts ghosting, they just disappear and there's this mysterious fourth payment and the conclusion of the work. And everybody's ghosting you. And you just at some point have to say, I guess let's just consider this terminated. So I basically had that situation where I went into something with, high hopes, and then it just kind of did this kind of thing like that. And I thought, we're just going to have to call this 3/4 done And that's all we can do, because I'm not more powerful than somebody else's, whatever's going on, self-sabotage, distraction, crisis. I don't know what that is. And I feel like this is the thing that all of us have to realize and recognize. So to me, those are the most painful ones, because I had high hopes for it. And I know my clients have been in the situation before where they're like, this was a huge priority for the company and everybody was all excited about it. And now I'm the only one excited and everybody's kind of like, because organizational priorities have changed. So I think those are, the negotiation there is to maintain this thing as a priority. Like, remember when we started that this is what we wanted. I've also seen that, in sales situations where, and I've been working with some of my mastermind clients on this, where somebody seems really interested in working with you and then they have a think about it period. And then they kind of disappear. And they're trying to figure out how do I call that person back? And what I would say is, in that, in your discovery calls, when you're saying, here's the thing, your dream, here's the thing that you really want. And the only time I would ask why is why is that important to you? And how can we connect you to that thing? And here's the path to that. And do you believe in the path to that? Sometime during when they said, yes, I definitely want that. And now that has fallen away. And so to me, the negotiation is between saboteur, like, were they sabotaged by this? Did the idea of achieving that freak them out and then they had to go away? Did they make a different decision, which is, that's the thing that we always have to deal with. And I feel like I don't mind that you didn't choose me as much as I mind that you don't pursue that dream that you said was so important to you. You know what I mean? So I think I can accept that they went with another choice, and this is always my concern, did someone get to them? Meaning someone in their circle said, oh, that seems like really hard, and I would hate for you to do that. And I don't know, that seems scary. Aren't you scared? And then other people kind of talk them out of their dreams. So I think those are the times when things slip away, and that's,
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things that I often say is that a bad deal for you is a bad deal for me. I just may not know it yet. And, and you think about it, right? It's like in those situations where, you're really, where I know I've seen it when I worked at Deloitte Consulting, I'd see it. Be really excited about a project, really excited about working with clients. Then a client had changed, the priorities would shift. And then my enthusiasm would get impacted, and I enjoyed the project less. And then it just kind of would get into this downward spiral. And then it'd just be like, this just doesn't feel good. This is just, why am I getting on a plane on a Sunday night and not coming home till Friday for this project, right? Yeah. And it's just, and so and you see it in marriages all the time, right? Yeah. A bad deal for you is a bad deal for me. I just may not know it yet. And being open to that, and acknowledging that, it's in giving yourself permission to say that's okay. That's okay. And that's okay in any negotiation. And, separating a relationship is still a relationship, and how you do that and how you manage that is still really important. And so I love the firing client conversation, and I've turned clients away that it's just like, this project just doesn't feel right. And or I've said, I've had a feeling about a person, to Malcolm Gladwell's, Blink. Yeah. His book, Talking to Strangers, is also fabulous. I like it better than Blink, actually. Yeah. And so, but we're trusting that intuition more and listening to that inner voice, because when we engage with people, we engage emotion before we engage logic. People would like to think it doesn't work that way, but it does work that way. Yeah. So we always think we are emotional creatures before we are logical creatures. And when your gut is telling you something, it's that emotional piece is connecting with your logic, because you have built all that experience over time, as Malcolm talks about. And it's like, and your gut is saying, based on all this experience that we've had, I'm telling you right now, this is not going to be a good outcome. Right. But yet, we step over it and we keep going. And it's like, and then we look back and we go, crap, I should have listened to that boy.
And that's the learning. I mean, that's the real learning opportunity. And this is why I think business is so much about personal development for the owner, because you get to look back and say, why did I do that in this situation? Did I feel like I needed the money? Was I won over because it was referred to me by someone who's important to me? Did I feel like a challenge? Was I just excited about what were the things that caused me to not discern it? Or in this case, I feel like I kind of knew that it had the potential to go south, and guess what? It did. So it's not that much of a surprise. What were my learnings and takeaways from that? That to me is the key piece, so that I don't literally do that exact same mistake again in the future. That's what I want to make sure of. But other than that, I'm like, I want to be honing my intuition. And I think as business owners and decision makers, that's the thing that we need to be doing, is like, okay, like I would say I'm a no blame, no shame person. And I don't blame myself or my team or my clients. I'm always like, let's figure out what happened and why that happened without blame or shame. And that way we can make different choices in the future.
Oh, that's great. Because that's something that people are not as effective at as they could be, is, I always have said that, people are like, well, tell me about a time you made a bad decision. And I'm like, I've never made a bad decision. I've had many bad outcomes or less than desirable outcomes. But at the time when I'm making the decision, it's the best decision I can make at that given point in time with that information. So I'm not going to sit in here and go back and beat myself up over the decision that was made. I'm just going to make a new decision. Make a different decision, create a different outcome. But we get so stuck focusing on that past stuff, and we try to bring it with us everywhere we go. And we do that in negotiation. It's one of the reasons why I find negotiation can get, when negotiations get angsty or emotional, or they're screaming and yelling, as there has been in a number of, I've been screamed at. I actually don't scream, but I've had a lot of people yelling at me in negotiation. And that's a clear indicator to me that they're stuck in their past. There's something about what was just said, what was just proposed. There's something about their life experience, because we all bring our humanity and our life experience to the negotiation table. And it's something about their life experience, their past life experience, they're stuck in. So one of the awesome parts about negotiating is being curious about that counterpart, to figure out where they stuck and how can we figure out a way to get them unstuck, right? And moving forward in the relationship. And I think I've said this to you before, because negotiation is a hopeful act. And we negotiate in the moment based on information from the past, trying to divine the future. And, and the future doesn't ever unfold the way we think it does. And so not only can you sometimes fire a client, but you can always renegotiate the deal with them too, if it's not working for you.
Totally.
Is there another way of making that deal more effective and work better for both of you?
Well, and that's a great point, because I have had clients come to me and say, I made this deal with the client, and then I said I would do, for example, I said I would write these extra 5 web pages for them. Well, it turns out that it was, I thought it was a little bit of work, but it turned out to be like much more work than I thought it was going to be. And no, what do I do? And I'm like, well, go to the client and explain the situation. So I call these like grown-up conversations, mostly to kind of try to make light of them. It's like, let's have a grown-up conversation. It basically means I have to go to my client and say, hey, when we talked about doing this, I was excited about it. And I thought it was going to be about this. And then when I started doing the work, I think you'll agree that it ended up being like this. And, probably that was my fault, but nevertheless, what I would like to request is, to an additional payment of this to cover the work that I did. A reasonable client doesn't want you to be overextended. And so this is a great opportunity to find out if they're reasonable or not. But, in this case, my client said that her client was reasonable. And I was like, well, here's what I would do. It's like, go ask for more money. And she did. And that relationship continues. They have since made yet another agreement, and they continue to work together. So I've always, it's not how I grew up. It's not how I was when I was 20, but now that I'm, I've been in business a while, I'll go back to the client and say, hey, I think we need to look at, the scope of this change. Let's renegotiate is not what we necessarily would say, but it's like, hey, can we kind of sit back down and kind of reconsider how this is working? That can feel super scary, as all grown-up conversations do. Like, hey, we've been working on this a while. I've noticed that the organizational priorities have changed, and I don't think it's in our best interest to continue working together. Right? That's just a grown-up conversation. They can have a fit about that however much they want, or they can say, which they probably will, because usually if there's discontent on one side, there's discontent on another side. Probably they'll say something like, yes, we've noticed that as well. Okay, let's suspend. How do you imagine that would look? And then you go from there. So I just feel like we avoid conversations, and boy, do people want to do this by email. And I'm like, no, you don't break up by email. No, you don't renegotiate by email. No, you don't. Like, for goodness sake, make a ideally face-to-face or Zoom to Zoom call and just have a grown-up conversation. People are reasonable. And if you're working with clients who aren't reasonable, then you need different clients, because that's the beginning of your transition is, I don't work with clients like this anymore. But I've gone to clients before and said, we need to, reevaluate how this is going. We need to, this is actually turned out to cost us a lot of money from my side. And I'd like to kind of request that we do more money. I've had clients say, hey, I don't think we need all these services anymore. Can we redo this? All kinds of things are possible and can happen. And one thing I would say, and I thought for a while that I was kind of naive in doing things this way, is I don't have all these like 50-page contracts in my business like I have signed to be part of other people's programs before. Why? Because let's be honest, like, this is just an intimidation tactic to have a 50-page contract for someone. And if somebody really wanted out of it, do you think that your lawyers are going to go to court to figure this out? I don't really think that that's what's going to happen. So I have a thin little, usually 1 to 3 page agreement for $50,000 and $100,000 engagements with other small business owners. And I say, here's the deal. If something comes up and you're unhappy, come tell me about it. I've had clients say, well, can we add this paragraph here? I'll say, yes, we can add that paragraph there. But let's have a conversation about it. So I just feel like that energy can make a more peaceful arrangement. I know that you're working very large companies. They have cadres of lawyers. They're going to have, much more than 50-page contracts. It's a different situation. But in our little world, I come from the South, and often I'll refer to my, they have gentlemen's agreements there, right? It's basically like 2 guys did a handshake kind of thing. And I'll call it a ladies and gentlemen's agreement. And people are like, what the hell does that even mean? And I'm like, it means that you and I read these things to each other and have like a little handshake. And because we're professional, please sign it and send money. And then we're in agreement together.
So I like that. The thing that's interesting to me about that is that, so I talk a lot about informal and formal contracts, right? And it's, I've worked with large multinational companies that spend $1 million on something and don't have a contract for that $1 million spend. And like, what the heck are you doing? Right? They quickly then have a contract, but but a lot of my clients are small too. So, and different types of clients use different types of contracts. An informal contract, something that's, done on a handshake, written on a napkin, all those kind of things. Those are still legally binding agreements. They are legally binding agreements that are defensible in court. And so don't make the mistake of assuming that just because you've, written it on a napkin, or in one client of my client's case, they did a bunch of stuff while on a napkin and over Facebook Messenger, that it's not a legally binding situation, right? Because it is. And then when you start behaving as if that agreement is, the agreement, then it's even that solidifies, that reinforces that it is legally binding. And so, but the thing about contracts is that contracts are risk mitigation tools. That is their number one thing that a contract is supposed to do. It is not, I have this, a lot of big companies will attach operating manuals and tons of operating procedures and crap in an agreement. I try to pull that stuff out because it changes too much, too often over time to make the contract be, the contract becomes inflexible in those situations. But if a big company won't get rid of the operational, all of that detailed operational stuff, then I negotiate the hell out of it, because a smaller business often can't adhere to a lot of those operational requirements. So, but understanding, and one of the things we talk about in our Venn Masters program is we actually teach people how to read contracts in a different way, taking this risk lens, because there are 5 types of risks in contracts, and only one of them is legal. So you have legal risk, but then you have 4 business risks. You have profitability risk, cash flow risk, operational risk, and strategic risk. And so when you're reading contracts and you want to look at a contract from those lenses to say, which of these risks am I more willing to accept versus others? And some clauses you might have hit 3 of those risk factors. And it's like, I better negotiate this clause. This clause matters a lot to me now because it's hitting profitability, cash flow, and strategy. Holy crap, what am I going to do? Right. And so it's a really easy way of kind of starting to narrow kind of how you think about the contract. But the other thing about contracts is I've negotiated contracts that are 1,000 pages long. And guess what? There's still usually less than 10 major sticking points, no matter how big the contract is. There are 6 to 10 big things that matter to both parties. And so when you focus on those 6 to 10 things and you realize what all that legal mumbo and jumbo is doing in the contract, that really helps you to break it all down into bite-sized components. And the other thing on contracts is that if you can conceive it, you can contract it. So you can get creative, but you also can go back and renegotiate. And in your contracts, make sure you set up timeframes that say, we're coming back to reevaluate this. Do not do automatic renew contracts. I hate auto renew contracts. Go back, make sure you're evaluating, is this relationship effective or ineffective? Is how we're working effective or ineffective? Does the contract reflect how we actually do work together? Right? If the contract doesn't reflect how you are working together, then you need a new contract. And so make sure you create gateways in your relationship so that you're sitting down and having those conversations and evaluating them. And the other thing is, what I love about, hi, Kitty. One of the things I love about what you talked about in terms of grown-up conversations, I call that, I have a mentor named Blair Dunkley, and he calls it naming and labeling. Right? Let's name and label what this is. Let's just call it what it is. Don't, just it is what it is. And so just name it, label it. And sometimes you find that you label it differently. And it's like, well, what is your what's your label mean? Well, this is what what I thought wasn't working isn't the thing that's not working. So now let's figure it out. Right. And so, so I ranted on there for a minute, but
I love it, especially the naming and labeling.
Yeah, name and label.
You give people language to have a conversation about something, and grown-up conversations can be scary. Like it can feel like confrontation, which I'm sure you're familiar with doing negotiation, and so all of these things where it would just be more comfortable for me not to ever go there at all. And I think especially women suffer from this, where we're like conflict avoidant, and we really don't want to ruffle feathers, and we don't want to be seen as being a problem. And also, for heaven's sake, like asking for extra money once we've already decided something, like that feels like, really outside of our comfort zone. Kind of taking the charge out of the words, I think, is the big opportunity in this. Can we just take the charge out of the words so that we can talk to each other? That, to me, I've noticed so often, if I can just give my client the language and we can practice saying things, like they can practice saying, well, the investment is $25,000 a month, and then they don't die. And then we practice saying that over and over and over again until when they're in front of the client, they can say the investment is $25,000 a month. So I think that naming and labeling is the cousin of that, in that it is reducing the charge and giving people permission to say things.
That is, so I love that you practice that with your clients. I think that's spectacular, because that goes back to the negotiation we have with ourselves, right? And so when you're practicing that and you're articulating it to another person out loud, right? You're doing that negotiation with yourself, and then you are able to sit and have those conversations that are challenging. And you are absolutely right about confrontation. And one of the other things that Blair talks about is comfort versus safety. And it's like, you use the phrase, it's like, am I going to die? Did I die? No, I didn't die. Right. So it's not a safety issue. My safety is necessary, and I'm just super uncomfortable. But growth only happens when we're uncomfortable. I mean, our brain grows, the nerve endings grow to meet each other only when we're uncomfortable. And once we're comfortable with something, we stop growing, we start improving. And so I love that. I think that's amazing. So,
and I'd say if I gave you $600,000, would you be willing to be a little uncomfortable or maybe a lot uncomfortable? That's the opportunity, I think, is when people see like, well, that's what I want. And I'm like, well, here's the road to get there. I just tweeted yesterday, what if the thing that you've been avoiding is exactly the thing which will get you to the place that you want to be? I said that because I had like 5 clients come to me and say, but well, here's the thing I don't want to do. And I'm like, do you know what you need to do though? Here's where I want to be, but here's the thing I don't want to do. I'm like, that's the thing you need to do. It's almost like you probably know what it is, and you just need someone else from outside to say, oh, that's what you need to do. So be a little uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I mean, it drives my husband crazy because he can't be that outside person in those moments.
I know. Don't take your consulting skills home.
Right, exactly.
That doesn't get received well.
But I think this thing about confrontation is an important component because, I speak all over the place, and I've talked to thousands of people and worked with thousands of people to help them improve their negotiation skills. But the thing, and so often I get, oh my God, but negotiation is just so confrontational. And I'm like, all relationships have confrontation, right? My husband and I have been married 28 years. And of course we have conflict in our relationship. We're 2 different human beings with 2 different perspectives. I can speak in front of 1,000 people and say what I'm going to say. And every single one of those people will have a different takeaway. Mm-hmm. And they will have heard my message differently. Yeah. Some will love the sound of my voice, and some it'll be like nails on a chalkboard. And it's like you can only control the intent that you have with what you're communicating. You cannot control how somebody interprets what you've said, which is a really important thing to understand in negotiation. Mm-hmm. You can only control. This is why I hate gamesmanship in negotiation. Treating negotiation as a game instead of a relationship, because that making it a game and playing at it doesn't build a long-term relationship. And in business, we're trying to build relationships, not transaction after transaction, because the transactions come when you have the relationships.
Mm-hmm. And Christine, do you feel like I agree with you that we can't control how other people receive what we're going to say? But one of the things I think is if we can manage our intention a little bit better, then we can make things easier for another person. So somebody will say to me, like, how do I ask for referrals without feeling awkward? Or without making people feel awkward? I'm like, you don't feel awkward. Well, how do I close the sale without making that person feel nervous? I'm like, you don't feel nervous. So I feel like if we can kind of have more clean energy, and I don't, cleared energy feel, I don't know how to put it in not a woo way, but let go of the idea of like, oh my God, I'm so nervous and I feel so awkward. Oh my God, this is so confrontational. If you have that thought, then everything you say is going to be confrontational, even though it probably isn't. And if you think, hey, I'm building a relationship, then the things that you say that might have even sounded confrontational, I think can come across as not confrontational. Am I being too rude about that?
I agree with that. I mean, Mahatma Gandhi's quote, be the change you want to be in the world, right? So be the person who you want to be doing business with, right? Be that person. Be, for me, it's very much about relationship. And, I only want to be doing business with people who want the kind of relationship that I want to have, right? And, so yes, and we do that. We do that by, mirroring kind of. And it's even subconscious mirroring. Chris Voss talks about mirroring in his book, Never Split the Difference. But, it's not like mimicking. It's not mimicking. There's a difference between mirroring and mimicking. And it's mirror the behavior that you want to be, mirror. And you see things in people that are part of who you are too. Yeah. Like you recognize, when you connect really well with somebody, there's something about that person's personality and behavior that mirrors yours because you've connected in that way. And so becoming really aware of what that is very useful in negotiation. And I don't like kind of tactics with negotiation, except when it comes to how I behave. versus manipulating your counterpart to behave in a certain way. It's more tactics are about focused on internal in terms of what we do. But yeah, I agree with you. I like that a lot. I like that. So awesome. Samantha, this has been amazing. How do people find you?
People can find me online at samanthahartley.com. I welcome listeners to my podcast, which is also on YouTube. That's the Profitable Joyful Consulting podcast you mentioned. And I have a super guide that I put together for helping consultants to close six-figure clients and do more transformational engagements. And in it, there are links to case studies about Patty and Carrie and other clients, some of the ones I mentioned today and other clients that I've worked with. And you can find that at sixfigureclients.com with the number 6.
Awesome. And we will put that all in the show notes, which the show notes for everybody can be found at venn.zone. So super easy. Mm-hmm. And you can also look and find out more about Venn negotiation and what we do. And this has been great. I have really enjoyed this conversation, especially because I have so many consultants who literally say to me, I don't negotiate. And if you are one of those consultants listening today who thinks you don't negotiate, I hope that listening to Samantha actually shows you how much you really do negotiate, both with your advisors, but with your clients as well as with yourself. And this has been super valuable and informative for me. I've learned a lot. And so thank you for being here, Samantha. And to all the listeners, thank you so much for being here and giving us your greatest gift, which is your time. I really, really appreciate that. Remember that negotiation is nothing more than a conversation about a relationship. And you cannot win a relationship, but you can get more value out of it. Happy negotiating. And until next time on In the Venn Zone, we'll see you soon.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of In the Venn Zone with Christine McKay. We invite you to visit our website at www.venn.zone to access the show notes and other helpful resources. Empower the negotiator in you and successfully level the playing field. Join us again next time here on In the Venn Zone.